Hello and welcome to episode 257 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are going to be talking at least a little bit about the Modern Warfare 4 beta, which is it's been going on for the last few days. I know a lot of pro players have been playing it. Bink has played it a little bit, so we'll talk about that. We also have some RosterMania news, some big, honestly, some big leaks and rumors and reports and seemingly upending some of the prevailing theories about RosterMania this offseason. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. First and foremost, my sister gave birth to my second niece this morning. So shout out my sister and welcome Mia. Hope you're a future Ego Chall listener. But yeah, like you mentioned, been an interesting week or so in terms of everything going on in the COD world, and I think we got some decent stuff to talk about.
Yeah, congrats to Dr. Bink on another child, another Binkowski floating around the universe. Let's get to the beta first, because I have not played it, but I have obviously watched a little bit of it, watched some of the pro players. Obviously, that is a much different point of view than watching just your random Call of Duty player. But how did you feel about what you've seen of the beta and what you've actually played of the beta?
Yeah, I played it for like 2 hours. Last night was my first time playing it, and honestly, I didn't have any like groundbreaking takeaways. I would say, from a pure beta perspective, it's kind of crazy that there's like no counter to UAV and available because the level's capped at 20 right now, and Ghost isn't unlocked as a perk until 24 or 25. And counter UAV isn't available, so like we're playing search, and any round where either team gets a UAV is just an automatic win, basically. So that was a little weird to navigate in that sense, but obviously that's just like a beta thing that they probably overthought or didn't think too much of at the time, and is what it is. But I really didn't, like I said, I played only about 2 hours. Eventually unlocked the M4, and kind of like you were saying off stream before we started right here, like it really did feel like the MW 2019 M4 to me, like using that gun with the iron sights and just running around, almost essentially an all-purpose weapon, not even just like an AR. It was pretty good. So I enjoyed that. Um, I didn't really have any crazy thoughts on any of the maps. I think a new map was added today that I haven't played, but like I think there was only 4 maps when we were playing last night, and it was, I just remember at one point making the comment like, I mean, COD maps developed within, the last couple years. Like, what are you going to expect from a COD map developed by around 2026? Like,
Yeah, they suck.
didn't really have super high expectations for the maps, and there were at least 2 of them that were like, they felt really small, and like I said, we were playing search, so maybe that's because we were playing search and we weren't playing respawn or whatever, but they felt really small and hectic and chaotic for that, especially 6v6 in a pub setting. So again, could be different in other modes and whatnot, but that was my experience. I don't even know the names of the maps, to be honest. One of the maps I think it was actually called Rooftops or something similar to that, and that one was all right. And there was another one that was like a Japanese or Asian like little city that was, again, it felt kind of smaller, but it I thought it played decent for search. I don't know if it would be competitive, but I mean, it was kind of a 3-lane map, and it did. There was one round on that where we played, we pushed whatever bomb site was on like the right side of the map, and somebody just ran down the middle of the map and shot 5 of us in the back within like 10 seconds, and we were like, oh, that happened really quickly. So that makes me think that it might not even be a competitive map. But yeah, I mean, end of the day, the beta is what it is. It's definitely not gonna sway my opinion on MW4. I still have no intention of purchasing this game. First time in 15-ish years I'm able to say that. Like I said it a couple years ago, I think, and then they said something about zombies, and I was like, all right, I'll get this one because it's zombies. And I'll still play that at least. But this game, unless they do a surprise zombies drop that's tied to this, I have no intention of purchasing this game. I don't think the beta is really going to change my mind, but I will. I mean, it's Call of Duty at the end of the day. Played six stack for a little bit last night with some of the boys, Tremmy, my cousin Chris, some of my buddies from college. Hype joined for a little bit, so it is what it is, and it was fun in that sense, getting to play with the boys, but nothing really groundbreaking from the beta perspective on my end.
The maps are Rooftops, Silkworm, Transit 213, Cachet, Lotus, and Kill Block. So
say it again.
Rooftops, Silkworm, Transit, Cachet, Lotus, and Kill Block. I've seen a bunch of these maps. I could not tell you which names of which maps, honestly. I've been watching like some of Dashy and some of Simp just to kind of see, like, obviously in Shotzi as well, just to kind of see what movement is going to kind of dominate this game. And I mean, like I told you, and like I mentioned, this looks very, very similar to MW 2019 just in general, and that is not a good sign for competitive. That is not a good sign for the general player base. I don't think like MW 2019 was necessarily like a bad seller for Call of Duty, but that was also 7 years ago, I think, at this point. And if you're not, I think, innovating and you're not trying to move it forward, meaning the franchise and the game in general, I think that what we saw with Black Ops 7 this past year and how people reportedly did not buy that game very, very much, and how Call of Duty and Activision and Microsoft were kind of worried about that, I don't think that bodes well for another MW game that looks exactly like the previous 3 MW games over the past 6 years. So that really concerns me. I don't think it, competitively, like I certainly don't think that it is good, just because if you don't have a fun and exciting game, then it doesn't make for it can limit how fun and exciting the competitive is. But we saw with MW 2019, we've seen with some of these IW games in the past that the competitive scene is still fun. The games are still fun. You get to see like a lot of really competitive matches, but I just think like it has a limiting factor where you consider like how great it can be. And, if people aren't into it, people aren't playing the game, I think that really hurts your CDL viewership and the interactions that maybe the competitive scene will have with this game. We got Don't Cheat in the Twitch chat. He said that's annoying for sure. And we have ES and Josh with a hype train and a gifted 5 subs. So shout out to Hype in the Twitch chat. Appreciate that very much, brother. Anything else on the beta? Anything else on MW4? I think we should, before you say that, the third game mode. So we've seen this over the past 6-7 years. We've had like 3 different third game modes. Obviously, back in the day, Domination was the game mode. Capture the Flag was a game mode. During the Jetpack era, we had Uplink as the game mode. And starting with Black Ops 4, we had Control. And obviously, this season we had Overload as well. It seems like the third game mode for the CDL moving forward will be Hijack. So not the map off of the yacht in the Black Ops games, but it seems very similar to Uplink and Gridiron, which was the World War II game mode that was like boots on the ground, kind of like football, basketball, kind of. It looks very similar to this, and basically it is the way that the developers revealed this or explained this was that there is a data spike on the map, and a team can take the data spike and they have to take it to the other end of the map. They have to take it to the enemy base, basically, and they can throw it in or they can carry it in, but it also can be shot and deflected. So if somebody throws it, the enemy team can shoot it and try to kind of block it out of their zone. What do you think of this game mode? Because we obviously talked about like could Gridiron or something similar work with a boots on the ground game, but nothing has actually come of that. So what do you think of Hijack?
Yeah, I'm definitely super excited to see how it plays. I am not going to I guess I'm not going to say exactly what I was going to say there. I was going to say I'm not going to have very high expectations for it, but I don't want to say that quite yet. I think that there is some potential here. This, like, we've talked about it for years now. Like the idea I've always had, and I think you've said it maybe at least once or twice when we've talked about it, is like the concept of that gridiron-esque thing where the portal or goal, whatever you want to call it, is still in the air, and in a jetpack game there could be like trampolines or something on the ground only in that area by the goal, and that's how you could like dunk or whatever, like uplink. This is I actually in the video I'm not sure how they like actually like does it count as a quote unquote dunk if they're just running into that area below the portal where you can throw it? I guess that's one way to approach it. I don't know. I still have to I think everybody will have to see.
We should also mention that the spike is basically a throwing knife, so it can be thrown at the other player to kill them too.
Oh, okay. I didn't even know that, but that is in this video I'm watching right now. I do think, though, very interested that they apparently tested this at EWC. Like, you know, if you told me something for MW4 was going to be tested by the pros this early on, like saying this early, but in comparison to other games, like this is probably earlier than some recent games were tested by anybody in the CDL before launch. That's at least somewhat promising. I do think my biggest concern with the mode is the shooting of the thing when it's in mid-air. Like, I feel like there would have to be some sort of range limitation or restriction in terms of how far away you could shoot it, because like this is obviously a drastic example, but like if somebody's throwing a Hail Mary from the halfway point of the map and somebody just spawns up and like, you know, I don't know. The point I'm trying to make is I don't know how that would work, is like if anybody just sees the thing in midair, you can shoot it and stop it. Like if it should be like sort of like the ball and uplink, in my opinion, like if you shoot it with like multiple bullets, it like goes further, and then like if it goes off the map, it resets. Because then you get to some scenarios where like maybe it's even, you know how in Halo like the guys used to do the flag thing where they still might do it. They like throw it forward and go. That's like that in theory. Could I throw the knife myself and then shoot it into the portal? Like that would be kind of crazy. Maybe. So I would have to see how that works out, though. That was my immediate reaction, though, and I think that would be kind of like just imagine like you get a 4 down, you're down by, or it's a tie game, you kill all 4 guys on the other team. There's only 2 seconds left. That doesn't work because there's probably some spawn delay or whatever. But you know what I'm saying? Like 4 down, couple seconds left in the map. You throw it for a guaranteed goal, basically, to win a series at COD Champs, and then somebody just spawns and just turns and sprays and prays towards the goal, and it stops the knife from sticking, and then like that team loses or ties or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know how that would work, and I guess maybe that would just be a deterrent to throwing it, and you would have to do more of the, you know, the CTF-esque version of running it in, and throwing it would really only be when it's like a guaranteed 1-point shot. So I don't know. I mean, very early, I think it is also most interesting that like, you know, Overload could be a one and done mode. That was pretty hyped last year and seemingly might be one and done. I guess it could come back in a future Treyarch game or something. But yeah, I think it's it feels like, without being the exact thing we've talked about, it's probably the closest we've gotten to a mode similar to Uplink in a jetpack mode since Gridiron. So you know, obviously Gridiron didn't work out, but I am excited to see what the potential of this mode is. I think it is coming in the open beta next weekend, so if it is, I will definitely try that out.
Yeah, so like we really only have this one little video that happened at COD Next, and it was the developers kind of explaining what the game mode is. And I mean, it looks like you get 15 points if you throw it. So like if you throw the data spike, and there's basically, it's a basically a pole, and then there's like a, I don't know, like it's a light bulb essentially at the top, a big white light bulb, and if you throw it and you hit it, then that's 15 points. But they say that you can run it in for additional points. So I don't know what, maybe that's 30 points or something.
I didn't even see that. I was just assuming 1 and 2 like uplink.
Yeah. So, and it seems like, I mean, obviously, I'm just going based off of this one video, but it does seem like you can, like, there's a little circle around like the uplink, whatever they call it, like the site, and if you run that in, then you can get the extra points. But you can also deactivate the point as well. So I don't know exactly how that works. Like, like. So I think there are a lot of questions certainly to be answered, and if we're going to see the pros, when it comes to the open beta, and we get to see the pros play this game mode, I think that will give a pretty clear indication of how it's going to go. I like you said, and like they said, they had CDL teams testing this at EWC, and I mean, Dashy, who knows with Dashy and with these COD pros, because they'll say just about anything when the game is not actually out. But Dashy said, like, he kind of hinted that he liked this game mode, that he liked the game in general. But I mean, I certainly don't kind of hold that in high regard just in general, because, Tatch's tweets are kind of memes at this point, and he is not the only one that kind of has that, optimistic feeling when it's July or August or September, but then when it's like November 30th and they're playing their first set of scrims and they're like, this game is fucking ass cheeks and we need to get out of here. So I think that we're going to have to wait and see with Hijack. I think that it's an interesting idea. It certainly does not seem to be just as copy and paste as like, let's just do boots on the ground uplink, like, which I think was Gridiron. Like that was essentially what they were going for. And it obviously just, they scrapped it, and I think they went to CTF that season, which makes sense with it being boots on the ground. But I'm interested. I don't think that it probably will save Call of Duty or make or break the season, in all honesty, because it's the third game mode, and if Hardpoint is bad or S&D is bad in the game, then that's a much more pressing matter than if Hijack isn't up to standard. And you could say that about literally every third game mode that we've had for the last 5-10 years. Like there hasn't been one that is without some kind of issue. So we'll have to see what happens with Hijack. We'll have to see what happens with the beta in general, if there are more maps, any different guns that might pop up. Let's talk about RosterMania, though, because that's obviously taken a little bit of a backseat just because of the beta, but some stuff is certainly seemingly happening, especially with the Los Angeles Thieves. I think the last time we talked, that was just around this idea that Simp is basically, kind of testing the waters potentially, and could be throwing RosterMania out of whack. And we didn't know if Scrap and or HyDra would be sticking with LAT. It seemed like HyDra was more certain or more likely to be on his way out. But according to Ronnie Intel, who posted an article on August 20th on Breaking Point, he said that LAT is making a serious push to keep Scrap and HyDra together on their roster. He said, quote, sources indicate the Thieves are doing everything in their power to retain the pair. If they succeed, it would likely spell the end for Abizi and Neum, who would be granted their release to explore other opportunities. The duo reportedly no longer wishes to play together after a turbulent year. Should Scrap and HyDra commit to staying, sources say discussions are already underway about a potential reunion with Envoy, who won 2 events alongside the pair in Black Ops 6. There's also interest from Scrap's side in pairing with Alluka. If an agreement with Alluka cannot be reached, the fallback plan is a full reunion of the BO6 roster, which is Scrap, HyDra, Envoy, and Ghosty, the same core that won 2 events together previously. The Paris Genomates remain in the mix as well and still believe they're in the running for Scrap and HyDra. The Thieves' biggest edge over the French org is roster flexibility, having more freedom to build around the duo than Paris currently does. That said, sources indicate Genomates would be willing to pursue a buyout for a 4th player to play alongside Joe Deceives if that is what it takes to land the pair. So, this kind of goes back to some of the points that we had about Paris and LAT. I said, I think right after, or as RosterMania was getting going, I said, like, I wouldn't be surprised if LAT didn't bring back anybody from this Black Ops 7 roster, because especially if Scrap leaves, and it seemed like HyDra was most likely to leave, then you don't really need to build around a BZ and or Neum. Like, no offense to those guys, and I'm sure they will land on CDL rosters. I don't really have that much of a doubt about it. But the reason that Neum was on the roster in the first place, obviously, was because they needed to replace Kenny. Neum was kind of one of the only options I think that they could get at that time, and he was certainly a good option, I should say. But it wasn't like they had their complete pickings of AR players or of a flex player or anything. So they had to kind of pick who they could get. And Abizi, I just don't think that he's near his peak anymore. And if this was 3 or 4 years ago, Abizi, then certainly you can make the case that he's perfect for this. But it did take a while for he and HyDra to kind of mesh together, and it certainly came together toward the end of the season when it became an NPC meta, and that's kind of what you expect. But obviously did not end very well because they got last place at Champs for the second year in a row, and it makes sense for them not to run it back with that 4-man roster. And if you're going to keep Scrap and HyDra, then you're going to have to make some other change. Like, it would be really surprising for them to run it back with that with those 4 guys. So what do you think about this? Because, I mean, obviously you have been on the HyDra to Paris train for a while. I think that it makes a lot of sense, especially if it's he and Joe are the SMGs on that team. That's the craziest SMG duo that like potentially has ever been put together. Like, I can't think of many, 2 guys, any pairs really in COD history that have that much talent. It's very, very rare. And then if you were to add Scrap, which that seems to still be an option, like that's an insane roster, even though it would not necessarily help because they have Estrio that's reportedly under contract and like they might have to move some things around. They also could keep Ghosty if they were willing to kind of move around the roles a little bit, or if they feel like those 4 players could play together. So what do you think about this whole LAT Paris situation with Scrap and HyDra?
I'm going to try to keep my thoughts as concise and to one point as possible, because I feel like this could be like a massive spider web that jets us off in multiple different directions. First and foremost, slightly as a joke to set the mood, there is the component of the report here talking about Alluka, and particularly Scrap side. The sentence from Running Intel is, quote, there's also interest from Scrap side in pairing with Alluka, end quote. And I think that's very interesting because a certain Patrick Aches Price was telling Scrap to pick Alluka up in place of Kenny probably 10-ish months ago.
Yep.
At this point, and didn't go that way. They did win a tournament this year, and it is what it is. But I do think that is, interesting that it seems like maybe now Scrap is, and for, Scrap's credit too, maybe it took seeing Alluka do what he did at Champs and EWC to be fully convinced. But I think in terms of like the running back, the old roster, you kind of said it there. Like, this is a team that has gotten top 8/last place at Champs back-to-back years. And the consistent there is Scrap and HyDra getting last place at Champs back-to-back years. And obviously HyDra's won Champs before. Scrap was in the finals and lost to HyDra when HyDra won. But most interestingly, they're allegedly, potentially, even if it's only slightly, like they're going to run back that team that got last place at Champs last year, not this past season, but the season before. And there was that video that came out of like Ghosty and HyDra talking backstage or something, and people blew that up. And I think that was part of like the narrative coming into this season about potential chemistry issues or whatnot with the General Mates squad that started the year. So I think there's a lot of intricacies that, you can pick apart with this report and go in different directions. But I think most notably, the running it back concept of Scrap, HyDra, Envoy, and Ghosty, I am not a fan of that. And I think that would have to be in a scenario where Scrap and HyDra get the bag that everyone thinks they're getting, and then LAT tries to potentially not spend as much money on the other 2 players, which I don't think is smart for Ghosty. I think maybe Envoy is in that position where, he wants to be on a CDL team and he might have to take a pay cut compared to his salary, but I don't know. That's speculation, and I don't know what he's getting paid and all that. But one other thing I mentioned to you previously too was that in the scenario where Envoy is being linked to Scrap and HyDra, regardless of who that fourth is, I feel like that is setting the stage for what we literally saw this past season, where LAT started the season, Scrap, HyDra, Abizi, and Kenny. Everybody was saying that Kenny might be an issue, might need to be replaced, yada, yada. Turns out that is what they ended up having to do, and they get the Rookie of the Year to replace him. Feels like to me that could be a similar situation to what might unfold here if they go down this route of Scrap, HyDra, Envoy, plus whoever. If they get off to a slow start, is Envoy just replaced by another rookie? And if that's, even a slight possibility, why aren't we just going after that potential rookie player instead of doing this dance at the start of the season to begin with? Obviously these guys are familiar with Envoy and they like him as a guy and the personal relationships and all that. So I do get it from that perspective. But it's got the wheels turning for me. And then there's, I if you have anything on the LAT, we can get into the, I do want to talk about the Abizi, Neum, and Joe Thieves component of this, but if you got anything else on the other guys, go for it and give me a little break.
Yeah, I mean, that, to me, and I said it before we started the show, like, it doesn't make sense to bring Envoy in. Like, no offense to the guy, but it's kind of the same way I feel about Abizi. He is not the guy that he was 3 or 4 years ago, and this team, if they run it back, and meaning that they bring back Ghosty and they bring back Envoy and that team gets back together, okay, like, I'm sure they'll be a good team. I'm sure they could be, a top 4 team for most of the season. I have no doubt about that. But we just saw a team that, was winning 20 straight matches. They won an event. They were 1 map away from winning another event. They were the number 1 seed going into champs, and they got last place at champs. And if they want to bring back Ghosty, I'm open to that. I think that would be a good fit. I mean, I think really, really highly of Ghosty. I'm still a believer in that. If they went to Gentlemates, like those 2 guys, and Ghosty was on the team, I think that works. If it's Ghosty, Joe, Scrap, HyDra, like we're kind of cooking. We're gonna see what we have with those 4 guys. But the Envoy piece of it just doesn't make any sense. I understand that he's probably very popular with the guys. They like him. They're comfortable with him. That's all well and good, but that doesn't mean that is the best choice for your team. And I think that they should look elsewhere. Obviously if they could get Alluka, then that's great. That's a great fit. Even if it's like Draza, like maybe, because obviously we've heard the rumors that FaZe could bring Alluka into their starting roster and potentially replace Draza. Draza could be an interesting fit with those guys. Obviously he's a former LAT player. And I think Scrap and Draza might have to get over some of their beef. And, we haven't heard a lot about them beefing like the last almost 2 years now. So who knows what the status of their relationship is like. But just certainly from a gameplay standpoint, Draza is a 2-time world champion. He's a very, very good player, and he might be able to fit in with that team, just in terms of gameplay. But yeah, I think it would be a massive mistake for LAT. But this would also be basically the massive mistake that they made to start last season, and that was Kenny. And I said it from the very beginning that Kenny he stuck out like a sore thumb on that team. He was literally a bottom tier CDL player the season before. Certainly with Optic, like who knows what was actually going on with that team, because like the team was really bad. He was really bad for the team. He ends up getting dropped. He goes to Minnesota. He's not as bad, but he's certainly not the Kenny that like we had come to expect and know. But and then they didn't even make champs at the end of the season. And then he gets picked up by a top team, and it just never made sense. It always seemed like he was going to be the odd man out. He was going to be the first guy dropped. He was going to be the reason that they were kind of limited. If they were not going to be able to win events, I think it was going to be because of him specifically. And I think that's going to be the same exact situation that they find themselves in if they do pick up Envoy. So I hope for them that they don't go with this 4-man roster. who they could pick up and like, you know, who's going to be available. You know, obviously I think they're going to have to wait to see like what FaZe does. Like if Simp does leave, if he goes to Paris, for example, man, like the dominoes just fall. Like who knows exactly how the rosters will end up at the end of the off season. But yeah, I just don't believe in that 4-man roster. And the Paris part of it, I think is really interesting, but I'll turn it over back to you.
I mean, shout out you for bringing up the Draza component there, because I was not thinking about that at all, even remotely, and I am now 1,000. Like, that's just like, you know, we talk about narratives and storylines all the time. Like, just imagining Draza and Scrap teaming together after all these years, and like, instead of terrorizing one another, yelling at their like tag team, yelling at other teams, at like, oh my god, I'm just thinking of that in my head now, and I kind of want to see it. I don't know how likely it is, obviously, but that was at least a fun 5 minutes of thinking about it even being a slight possibility. The other component to this Envoy thing for me is, again, like we've both said in previous years, thought very highly of him. I still think very highly of him as like a mind for the game, and even, you know, I don't even know what the specific search and destroy numbers are or anything like that, but I do think that you know, Envoy has a good mind for search and destroy, and that could be something that, you know, helps out, especially if Sender sticks around um with Scrap and HyDra there, as we heard that report of maybe HyDra and Sender going elsewhere. You know, you pair Sender with Envoy, that could help the S&D situation, but again, obviously they have that past experience together, so it is what it is. But my thought here on the Joe Deceives front is, this all could be like, you know, just like what we're hearing from the agents or whatnot, like the contract talk. They're just playing the field and trying to see what's out there. But it is very interesting to me that it doesn't seem like, again, this is just based on how I've interpreted these reports, but it's not what we talked about earlier in the season. Was that Gentlemates signing Joe Deceives in that season, locking him up and having him be this enticing SMG option to try to draw HyDra to Gentlemates. That is not the feeling I'm getting from these reports. It's almost like this report in particular is like they would almost rather play with Envoy over Joe Deceives, which is just a crazy thing for me to think about.
Yeah.
But that's like, I feel like if I was in this position, and again, obviously not in that position, but if I am HyDra and I am this disgusting SMG player and I'm trying to do whatever it takes to get on a team that can compete for multiple championships, I would be jumping at the chance to try and team with a guy like Joe, who was basically one of the best players in this past game. Now, there could be some stuff behind the scenes we don't know about. I'm not going to speculate on that. There also could be some like doubts, because it is like a Modern Warfare game versus a Treyarch game. So maybe it's like, oh, Joe was nasty at Black Ops 7, but is he going to be as nasty in Modern Warfare 4? But I don't know. That's just like some also you know, side thoughts I'm having there. But again, my portion of this for Joe Deceives is like, I am just shocked that hasn't been a portion of any of these reports where it's like HyDra has expressed extreme interest in the thought of pairing alongside Joe Deceives. Like, we haven't heard anything close to that. It's like, yeah, HyDra and Scrap are sticking together to do it. They might go back to Envoy instead of potentially teaming up with Joe Deceives. And I'm like, again, that could just be like what we're hearing from, and it could be like a play of like they're trying to get more money from the General Aid side and all that. So I don't know, but that is my reaction to that. And then there's the component too of this, like potentially Scrap and HyDra sticking with LAT but not wanting to team with a BZ and Neum. That obviously is that one thing we have said is it feels like a BZ and Neum are that like contingency plan for LAT. Is if they lose Scrap and HyDra, they can build around those two. But I didn't think about this other possibility of like Scrap and HyDra returning and then them getting rid of a BZ and Neum. So that's an interesting idea. And I do think in that scenario where Scrap and HyDra sign with LAT, I think it's like a slam dunk 1,000% possibility that a BZ goes and plays with Joe Deceives on Paris Gentlemates. They had been really good friends. I'm pretty sure like one of the origin stories for Joe is like a BZ playing ranked play with Joe Deceives. Like, I think that's like, so I think from a gentleman's perspective, as much as I've been on this train of like, it feels like HyDra is number one priority for them. I do think in a world where Scrap and HyDra return to LAT and don't want to team with a BZ again, I think I could very easily see a BZ going to play alongside Joe Deceives. And I regardless of what you said about, you know, a BZ being in his prime and whatnot right now, like I think that's a really scary SMG duo still. We talked about it before, the BZ and Kleenex idea. Like, yes, Abizi and Kleenex are both in the later years of their career, but I still think very highly of them. And I think it feels like it's like a giant tug of war right now, and we're not getting a ton of progress on where these guys are actually going, but there's a lot of possibilities, and that's got the wheels turning for sure.
I think, you know, obviously this is just speculation, but because Joe and BZ are close, it could be a situation where HyDra and Scrap, they played with a BZ, and maybe they know kind of what Joe is like, you know, good or bad, or I guess, or they know like what a BZ is like, and they're like, well, we didn't like this season. We're probably not going to like, you know, if Joe is remotely similar personality or whatever to a BZ or play style, like actually in the game, or the calm style, maybe we don't want to be with Joe. I think all of that is like kind of BS, like hopefully, because if I just look at Optic, and obviously it's different because, you know, Hook and Shotzi are your buds, and, you know, they have been for a while, but when you can put four great players together and like four, like, you know, kind of in their prime players together, I would say you have to do it. Like, you know, if Paris can bring Scrap, HyDra, and Joe, and a fourth, whoever the fourth is, you know, if it's Ghosty, that's great. You know, if they could get some other like top tier flex player, you know, then that it doesn't really matter all that much. But personally, I think if you can have three of the five best players in the world together on one team, and you can kind of match Optic, you know, guy for guy, and if someone's having a bad map, Scrap isn't having a great map like we saw at Champs, HyDra and Joe can pick up the slack. And if HyDra's not having a great map, Joe and Scrap can pick up the slack. And we saw that with Optic, and that's kind of why they had so much consistency this season. Even though if the grand finals appearances didn't go their way the majority of the time, they were able to get all those grand finals. They were able to win all of those matches, especially in the winners bracket. And it's because of all their talent. And, you know, if Hook is the worst player on your team, man, you're a really great team. And I think that is kind of the case with Paris if they're able to put those three guys together. And if you add in Ghosty, for example, or retain him, then yeah, I think that's, you know, if Ghosty is your worst player, then you're probably a really, really good team, and you could probably compete for any championship at any given time.
I think we'll talk about Alluka more in a little bit here too, but I think if you get Scrap, Alluka, HyDra, and Joe Deceives on Paris like that, I feel like that's a crazy squad. And like you said, like if Alluka, after what we saw him do at these first two tournaments of his CDL career, like if Alluka is quote unquote the worst player on your team, I think that's a pretty damn good team.
New Dark Age now in the YouTube chat said, have you guys done all-time rankings, and where would you put Aches the GOAT?
Number one.
Definitely not number one. Probably closer to like 10 now. I mean, a lot. There's been a lot of movement, obviously, over the past 2-3 years because of Optic winning back-to-back championships, with Simp winning his third. Obviously, like he's right up there. You know, you could probably put him at the top if you really wanted to. Draza winning 2 is great for his case. But, you know, if you go by era, obviously, like pre-CDL, like Aches is like very, very near the top.
You got to do era at this point because we've had this conversation before, and it's like Simp and Kremp have the same number of rings right now, but Kremp probably has 3 times as many championships. I don't know, is Simp at like 11 or 12 now, and Kremp was at like 38 or whatever. Like, it's like, it's not even close because just the different eras and whatnot. So that's, you know, if you're doing CDL rankings, unfortunately, Aches' tenure with the Los Angeles Gorillas isn't going to get him many brownie points, but a pre-CDL era tier list, Aches is in my top 10 easy.
Yeah, I definitely think like he's going to be underrated just simply because his prime was like a decade plus ago now, and like a lot of people that are watching now, and certainly anybody that's kind of come in somewhat recently, have really never seen him play or don't really know.
He's just the guy who hates Shotzi.
Yeah.
Not even hates him. He's just the guy who roasts Shotzi.
Yeah, he's Stephen H. Smith, and that's just kind of how they know him. But yeah, he is like in terms of like all-time greats, he's certainly one of them. It's just really hard to compare because like now, for a long time, we only had Karma. He was the only 3-time world champ. And obviously since then we've had several be added to that list, with Simp being the most recent. So then those guys kind of already like they levitate to the top essentially. As soon as you get 3, it's like you're one of the top 5 players like easily typically. But then you add in like Scump, who has obviously won fewer world championships than Aches, but like his longevity is crazy, like his top tier talent is crazy. And even someone like Formal, who's only won 1 and was kind of like obviously a late bloomer because he did not come to Call of Duty very early. He came after his Halo career, but like he's one of those guys. How high you want to put like Dashy, because he's obviously like multi-time world champion now, and one of the best ARs, potentially the best AR of all time. And typically that was reserved for guys like Octane and Formal for a really, really long time. And so I think we're gonna have to do it one of these days. I know that we've like like impromptu lists of like these guys, Simp and Abizi are like, for a while they were like literally 5A, 5B basically, and now I just don't think that's the case anymore. So we probably have to redo our lists at some point in the near future after, maybe this offseason we'll do that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about FaZe, because again, I still think that they are kind of the key to this offseason. I thought it was going to be LAT in Paris, and it certainly might be, but because we got that report that Simp was at least like putting out feelers like, hey, like if you want me, like I'm available. If you want to pay me a shit ton of money, if you want to bring my coaches, you kind of want to give me the keys to the organization, then I'm willing to make that work. With FaZe though, it seems like Alluka could be an option. So on August 17th, obviously this was a little bit after we did our episode last week, but Ronnie had a report that FaZe was thinking about replacing Draza with Alluka, which was what I said I would do if I was FaZe, because there are only so many opportunities that you get when you have a young, talented player like Alluka, who obviously made an incredible impact with the Falcons at Champs and EWC. Falcons were kind of dead in the water going into Champs, and then they come out of it and they get 3rd at the World Championship event. I think that you can't really overlook that. You can't discount that. And as much as I think very, very highly of Draza, and I think that he is very deserving of being on a top 4 team at the beginning of next season, regardless of what happens, I think that if you can have a team with Simp and with Alluka, Simp was the same kind of player, in some respects. Like everybody was waiting for him to turn 18 because they knew he would be in the CWL, he would be on a United, and they knew he would make an impact. With Alluka, it's obviously taken a little bit longer, but not that much longer in the grand scheme of things. But everybody has been waiting this entire season for him to get in. Like you said, Aches was like, in February, LAT should have been picking up Alluka, or January should have been picking up Alluka and replacing Kenny. And because they waited, FaZe got him as a substitute. They kept him on the bench for nearly in the entire season. He ends up going to the Falcons. And now he has a real opportunity of being with FaZe to begin the 2027 season. How do you feel about this? Obviously this was kind of just like a theory that he could replace Draza. Yeah. And, in Ronnie's report, he says Draza is open to leaving FaZe if the right opportunity arises, and that FaZe is reportedly weighing a change as well, with internal discussions around promoting Alluka into the starting lineup once his loan is up with the Falcons. What do you think if you're FaZe, if you're Crowder, if you're RJ, like what's kind of the thought process for you, and where do you think you would end up as far as Alluka versus Draza?
I mean, I have been on the Alluka train since that first debut where he burst onto the scene last season. So I think my answer might be a little more dramatic than possibly other people, but I think this is a opportunity that FaZe can't let slip through their fingers unless somebody is willing to pay the absolute bag to get him. Like that is like, in my eyes, that's the only way you let Alluka walk, is if it's literally like the type of money that can pay to make sure you keep Simp. You know what I mean? So I get the whole thing. We've talked about it. It feels like for like almost 2 months now at this point. All the teams, like historically, they win champs, don't make changes. Priest is that only case outside of like the one where it changed from 4v4, 5v5, or vice versa. So it would be slightly unprecedented for FaZe to do something here where they win champs and they drop Draza for Alluka. But I do think that's a move that like it could benefit. I mean, it could benefit both teams, like long term and in the short term. Like I feel like Draza, the Scrap and Draza thing, like I would certainly make that a possibility if they are able to put everything from the past behind them. I think in a world where Draza gets dropped first before like anything else happens, I think he would immediately become like maybe not plan A for Gentlemates, but like a very highly sought after plan B in terms of they aren't able to get Scrap and or HyDra, and then they go to get Draza, and then you have Draza and Joe, and you're looking for two. Like I don't hate that. So yeah, I think it's definitely a very difficult situation. Now the contract component of it too is something that I would be weary of, because I don't know how the substitute contracts work and because if this loan expires and then there's like a very small bargaining window or whatever, which is how I'd assume something would happen, then I don't know how that works for FaZe. But if it's like a situation where they like seemingly potentially signed him for close to the minimum to be a substitute, and they're able to just like do the 1+1 thing with him on a very low salary for this next season, that again, from a pure business standpoint, even taking out like Alluka as a player, you have these worries about Simp potentially even entertaining these other offers. I know it sucks because the team just won champs, and they obviously won with Draza before a lot, but like pure business standpoint, if like Alluka is a very cheap option because you're able to just like re-up his substitute contract, then you can use that money for whatever you're saving on Alluka plus getting rid of Jaza, and literally just be like, here you go, Simp. This is a little extra boost to try and convince you to stay and not even talk to these other teams. So I think from a business standpoint, it really does make sense. I think for me personally, from a skill standpoint, in terms of what we saw from Alluka these other two events, I think I am all in on Alluka going to FaZe. I do think though, there was some video I was watching of of Zuma talking with Methods, I think, about like the AR stats and whatever, and Draza had some really good numbers on lane.
yeah.
I was watching it late, and I was, it was one of those things I put on before I went to bed, so I wasn't paying super close attention to it. But that is another, like, obviously, yes, Alluka did play very well in 2 lands at the 2 biggest tournaments of the year in his debut, but Draza has been playing very well on LAN for a couple years now, and it is admittedly somewhat of a gamble for the champs winning team to potentially give this young Alluka kid a shot after, just 2 tournaments with Falcon. So I can see all the sides of it. I think, again, I feel like my general perception right now of RosterMania, regardless of all these reports, is that there's just a ton of chatter, and nobody, like, I have no idea what the first move is actually going to be. And I think it's going to be like, it could be a couple weeks, I feel like, until something actually happens that's like locked in. But I feel like once, again, I don't know what that could be, it could even be like FaZe like just announcing that Simp's resigning. But like as soon as that first move, we always talk about the domino, but in this case, it feels like it's like one of those TNT explosive boxes or whatever. Like it feels like it's like you press down on that and it's just gonna set off an explosion that triggers all these other moves across the board. And again, don't know what it's going to be, but it feels like it's building up to that moment. It could be Alluka to LAT, it could be Alluka to Gentlemates, it could be Alluka to Falcons, it could be FaZe to Falcons, it could be FaZe to Falcons, it could be Simp to Falcons, it could be Simp to Gentlemates, it could be HyDra and Scrap to Gentlemates, HyDra and Scrap to Falcons. Like I just feel like there's so many different possibilities right now. I don't have a good feeling about anything that is going to actually happen, but I am all in and loving like even I'm getting hyped up just thinking about all this stuff we're talking about here, and there's a chance that none of it happens.
Yeah. Before I add some additional context to that, he who enlightens in the YouTube chat said Alluka is a good move. Draws is good, obviously, but he comes at a higher ticket price. He said Alluka and MW4 bring pace and pressure on the map, which will allow Simp to do some things. I certainly think that because we saw FaZe have, they weren't bad at any point in this season, but they were inconsistent for a good portion of this season. And they were certainly not infallible. Like if you're Optic and, Optic and FaZe had, somewhat similar seasons. Obviously FaZe wins champs, Optic wins EWC. They each won one major. You can make the argument, but Optic is far more consistent, especially on LAN, especially in those tournaments, than FaZe was. So you can make the great argument that Optic should stick with those four guys, even if they had the exact same season that FaZe did. That you should stick with that team, even if you didn't win EWC. I still think that Optic should stick with that team. With FaZe, it's a little bit different, and FaZe also has a different situation on their hands because Optic doesn't have someone waiting in the wings. They don't have a substitute that they're like, maybe we should bring him up, maybe we should place Hook or whoever, because we think that like long term that can be the key to our success. I think that is certainly the case with FaZe. I think that if you're going to look at the next 3 or 4 years, and I think that's probably the best way to look at it, is like probably 3 years is probably what you're looking at. But if the next 3 years, would you rather have Alluka or would you rather have Draza? I think both of us would very easily pick Alluka, and that is literally not even a shot at Draza, because I think Draza could still win a world championship in the next 3 years. Like, I have no doubt about that. Like, if he, like you said, goes to Gentlemates, if he goes to Falcons, if he goes to LAT, if he winds up on the right team, he's at risk to win his 3rd world championship, because he is really, really good. But to me, I would just rather have Alluka. And, if it is just a one, you kind of pick one and you're paying them relatively similar, even if you have to pay Alluka more than you are currently paying Draza, I think that's the price of doing business. I think that is just what is to come. And hopefully he just kind of outperforms his contract anyway. Like, maybe I'm sure Optic gave Mercules a great deal to kind of make sure that he got to Optic. But like, if Mercules is one of the best players in the world, then like that's money well spent, in my opinion. And I think that they should kind of rock with that. Enlighten says Ix is the best, by the way. Hey, you guys are going to have to start a little fan club, because I'm not going to be a part of it.
Nah. Ego Chall Podcast, YouTube chat, Ix #1 fan page. I'm all down for that. But one final thing on the Alluka front too is something that I am definitely known to fall victim to in other areas of life as well, outside of this particular situation. Like, fantasy football is coming up. I feel like it, for lack of a better term, I always hear about like, it's like the shiny new toy syndrome.
Yeah.
And it's like, you all, like last year, like Emeka Ibuka is coming into this league as a rookie wide receiver. I was like, I got to get this guy in all my fantasy drafts. He's going to be a stud, breakout. And now he's coming into year 2 this year. And there really isn't a rookie wide receiver I'm super excited about this year in particular. But I'm like, I'm not like, yeah, I really want to get Emeka Ibuka. Like, I'll be cool if I get him. But it's like last year, it was like, I got to get this guy. He's that rookie. Like, it's the unknown quantity of like, this guy can just like be the next Megatron. We have no idea what he could be. And like, obviously, he had a pretty good season. But Just for that one example there, like that's part of this with Alluka, and that is something I definitely am biased towards, is like that I fell in love with Alluka very quickly early in this last season, and I was all in right away. And I mean, there could literally be some rookie who shows up and does the same thing in the first Challengers Cup of this next upcoming season, and I'm gonna have probably, maybe it won't be as emphatic as I am over Alluka, because I bought in instantly. But like, even to a lesser degree, like Ethan, like,
Yeah.
especially for me, Ethan was this, I didn't apparently Rocket League pro, and I knew nothing about him, and I still don't know a ton about him, especially in comparison to Alluka. But it's like, he comes onto the scene, people start talking about him, and it's like, okay, like let's see what this guy can do. And I think that's I don't even know if that's a real phrase, the shiny new toy syndrome or whatever, but like I feel like I've heard that before, and that's how I think about it. So it's like you said, Draza can obviously have a still phenomenal career. Like, two-time world champion already. He could literally win champs next year and be in legendary status with 3 rings. But it's just that the allure of the unknown that is Alluka, and we got a brief taste of it at the end of the season, and it's got everybody amped up, I feel like.
Well, how I think about it is, we have known Draza for, I don't know, 5, 6 years at this point, at least at the CDL level. So you know exactly the player that he is, and you know the player that he is not. Alluka has had 2 tournaments, and they were the 2 biggest tournaments of the year. In some respects, obviously the champ certainly, and you, not speaking just you, but like we as a community only got to see Alluka in 7 to 10 maps or matches in the CDL. So we have no idea what his limitations truly are. We know, the talent is there, but can that be sustained over an entire season? Can that be sustained in the system that FaZe has? Obviously, because I think Falcons were a lot more open to Alluka. You can do Alluka things a little more, because obviously has not been working out because, Celium has not been able to do what he wants to do and have the same impact that he's been having this season. I don't think Xnid is that kind of player. I don't think the Bulldog is necessarily that kind of player, because I think he is certainly he feeds off of some of the guys around him. So I think Alluka got more freedom in the Falcon system than he would with FaZe, because they have 2 MVP / all-star caliber players on their team already. And those guys play a certain way, and they might be able to change a little bit, but we saw what FaZe could be when Simp is at his best. We saw what FaZe could be when Abuz is at his best. When 04 is playing lights out, they're a really hard team to beat. So he's kind of having to slot in versus the Falcons, which were ready to make multiple roster changes throughout the this past season. So I think they were a little more flexible to what Alluka could do. And again, we just don't know what his limitations are. We don't really know what his true weaknesses are at the CDL level, and that's going to be a pitfall. But I'm like you. To me, I'm always thinking, okay, I would never have given a Neptune a second chance, to be honest. And I've said that before. I would be wrong, obviously, because he's an incredible player. But if I was the Surge in 2025, I would have been like, hey, Neptune, been there, done that. At least the CDL has. And I'd rather go for a rookie who's never had a shot. And maybe, I'm overlooking some of his weaknesses, or I just don't see them, but I want to give that person a shot, because I think they could be something great. And of course that's not going to work out a lot of times, but I would be in the Ethan and DK and the Alluka camp all day. I would be like, yeah, those are the guys I want. I don't want to go with Skies, I don't want to go with Kenny. I don't want to go with these guys that have gotten chance after chance after chance after time after time after time. I don't want those guys personally. So I would always reach for Alluka. But I will say it's different here, because this isn't just Alluka was great in challengers and he had a great season in challengers. We saw him against pro level talent, and he was able to do the things that I think a lot of people were hoping and expecting him to do. So I think it's going to be a really interesting offseason. I should mention though that FaZe is interested, of course, But Falcons is also interested. According to Ronnie Intel, he reported this on August 20th. He said sources have informed Breaking Point that the Falcons have made an official offer to FaZe to bring Alluka back to the organization on a permanent deal. And he also said this is expected to be just one of the bids FaZe receives for Alluka, as both LA Thieves and Paris Gentlemates are showing interest in him. And he said with a limited number of available AR players on the market, this situation places FaZe in a strong negotiating position. FaZe has had internal discussions about moving him into the starting lineup. Expect Alluka to be a key piece to the RosterMania cycle. I think with FaZe, it's going to be, in a way, it is kind of similar to what Toronto had with Joe this past season during the season, where yes, they could have kept Joe. They could have tried to go for champs and potentially placed where Falcons did, maybe even higher, depending on how well they came in at the end of the season. But they got offers, and they felt like financially that it was in the best interest of the organization and probably in the future, because they probably were we're not going to win champs, which I don't think that was out of the realm of possibility. Honestly, I was probably more optimistic about Toronto winning than most people were, but they thought, okay, we're not going to win, so we should sell. And they sold him to Paris, and they sold the season as a result. It's obviously different for FaZe, but I feel like they're in a kind of a similar situation, because financially it probably makes a lot of sense to sell Alluka. I'm sure they can sell Draza and whoever, they can, if he wants to go to Gentlemates or Falcons or LAT, I'm sure they could work out a deal and get some money back. But I would assume Alluka will be a much bigger, financial boost to them if they were to do that. But I just think in terms of the best chance of winning, I would go with Alluka. I think that he's the guy. But again, they have a lot of options, and I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of waited out. They could really screw up some teams, honestly, by waiting too, because they're in control. If everybody's waiting on Alluka, FaZe would be like, we're probably going to wait till the end of September to kind of come around to this deal, make teams kind of sweat it out. Maybe they get scared and they go to somebody else because they don't feel like they can wait around for him, but maybe that's just me. I think that FaZe has a pretty good option here, regardless of what actually happens.
It all comes down to how the contract works out with him being a substitute, the loan, and what that period after the loan expires looks like. I have no idea what the legality of that is. I feel like, to me, there would have to be some sort of again, this is really unprecedented in Call of Duty, so I don't even have anything to compare it to, but I feel like there's got to be some, for lack of a better term, a grace period, or some negotiating period or something like that, where it's maybe that's what they're in right now, and that's where this report of the Falcons offer comes in, and FaZe has a certain number of time to accept it and whatnot. But yeah, I think this Alluka is just adding to what could very well be one of the most explosive RosterManias in a long time, because like I said, I feel like it's going to be, we're getting all these reports and it's just the faucet is dripping a little bit, and then someone's just going to crank that nozzle, and it's just the water's going to start gushing out.
Enlightens in the YouTube chat said, will Skies and Insight look good on the new game, or are they just slow and slower? I would honestly be shocked if Insight is on a CDL roster to start the season. Skies, reportedly might end up with Vancouver Surge. Yep. I've made my position very, very clear for 2 seasons now, so I don't think that he will, I'm not saying that he's going to drop a 0.7 or whatever, but I don't think he is a game changer by any means. And I think that in many cases, especially if Surge is lack of a better term, splurging for a new roster, and they're going with Pred and Sib, who are very talented players, flawed, I would say, but talented. I just think he is kind of an odd man out. He's a weird fit for that team personally. But you mentioned on the last episode, he's kind of accuracy that, on the last good Surge team. And if the Surge could have upgraded over accuracy, I think they probably would have. If they could have gotten a top flight AR player, I think that would have made sense. but they just were kind of stuck with their roster, honestly. And he's a great like leader. Accuracy is so like, I don't know if Skies is necessarily the same mold, like if he's going to be kind of like a coach in the server essentially for the Surge. I don't know if that is necessarily the case, but I don't have very high hopes for him. Enlighten said Draws might try Falcons bag if Celium wants to team again, is another question. Yeah, I mean, I don't know why they would necessarily, unless like personally they didn't want a team, but like, they worked out relatively well. Just at the end of the season, it didn't work out. So, but you could say that about LAT, and it seems like they're kind of willing to run it back with, their team from 2 seasons ago. There should be a few dark horse teams this year. I wonder who Joe wants to run with and where Neptune goes. Joe D and Neptune duo for Genomates. Kremp. I mean, I don't know what actually happens with Kremp, because I do think that Minnesota is going to try to hold on to him and see what they can, try to build around him, obviously, because they had to let go of Estriel. And, Estriel and Kremp were a great duo, and I think that was a good solid base for them, but I don't have a lot of high hopes for them if, obviously they don't have Estriel now, and I don't know how much Kremp is going to be able to, like, what could they possibly do to really build around him to compete with some of the top 4 teams in the league. I just don't know.
One thing I will say, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little earlier, is like, feels like right now at least Kremp, G2 wants to keep a hold of Kremp, and Carolina wants to keep a hold of Lurks. Both of those guys seemingly are like players that could get opportunities on higher teams, but most likely won't be moved. But is there a scenario where like Falcons miss out on Scrap, HyDra, Alluka, etc.? And if that happens, does that set in motion something where Falcons is the type of team to go after these guys like Kremp and Lurks and pay these buyouts that might not be of interest to other teams not spending as much money?
Yeah, I just don't know. I think Minnesota is not in a great position because they lost a very good player late in the season. However talented Kremp is, like, there's just not that many players to kind of put around him to make, again, like, I think with the position that they're in, and like even a team like Vancouver, they're just trying to make it to champs, be somewhat competitive with the top 4 teams. But I think that there's a gigantic gulf. I can't even, like, it feels like this is more extreme than it has been in the past like 3 or 4 seasons, but the gap between like the Optic, LAT, FaZe, I'd even put Falcons in there, and Genomates, like the top 5 teams, because those are the 5 teams that are like reportedly spending quite a bit of money on their teams. The gap between those 5 teams and the other 7 teams seems gigantic, and I can't even see how a bunch of those teams make up the gap. Maybe they're able to overcome and they can pass up Falcons, because Falcons were like a complete shit show this season, and like they couldn't figure it out until they picked up Alluka. Obviously, Genomates had their fair share of issues. Maybe they could pass them, but like as a group in general, I just don't see how G2 Minnesota, Toronto Koi, Vancouver Surge, etc., how those teams can make up that gap without, finding kind of a needle in a haystack, like getting a Neptune like Vancouver did last season, where it's just like shit happens. Like that's just the luck of the draw in a really good way for them. But I just don't think that is very replicable for a lot of these teams. And for Minnesota especially, I have no idea what they can do with their roster that will make me think that they're any higher than like 6th or 5th place this season. So they're just not in a real good position personally. Anything else on that?
Nope, you're good.
Insight. He announced on August 18th that he is an unrestricted free agent. I just said not that long ago that I'd be kind of surprised if he was a starter on a CDL team at the beginning of the season. Maybe, the Royal Ravens or something, or whatever Boston team is coming in, like maybe they feel like, he has a lot of experience, obviously, like we could put him in the starting lineup, and he's like, calming factor for some of our younger guys. But not been good. Like, you know, I think we have to be really honest about that. And we have on this podcast, like, aside from the UK major, he has been a below average player, I would say. And at points been much worse than below average. I think Champs last year was one of his worst events as a pro. And obviously, like, this, you know, this year at Champs, like, they had no shot. Like, I'm not going to blame him. I think that the team and the organization gave up before that, and he tried to reportedly bench himself, and he came back in the lineup because they had no other options. You know, they were trying to get, who are they trying to get? Nasty, and then Nasty went to G2, and then Insight was like, I guess, like, I'll stick with the team. I'll ride it out. And they bring back Abe, which I think that was kind of a sign that, like, things weren't going great, that they brought him back and thought that he could do anything with that team. Like, you know, and again, not a shot at him, but, like, they weren't in a position to do anything. And, you know, I said it then, I'll say it now, but they completely failed Kleenex and they completely failed Kips this season, because, you know, if you sell Joe and you're not able to replace him, like, even G2, like, got Nasty, and you can say whatever you, obviously that's not like a 1-to-1, but, like, Nasty was the best player on Boston, and you could say, like, well, he fits a need. I didn't like the Envoy thing, but, like, I think they got a 2-for-1, and maybe that wasn't an upgrade necessarily, but Minnesota tried. Toronto did not try, and Insight was kind of he was like the glaring part of that. Like, he was evidence that they were not trying. Like, you have to upgrade from him before the season, and they didn't do that. And you have to upgrade from him during the season, and they didn't do that. And, you know, they got what they got. So do you have faith that he'll be on a lineup at the beginning of the season?
I still don't have total faith that he won't be back on Toronto. And I know we've said this on multiple shows now, but, like, this is the song and dance that we've seen from Toronto historically, is they let their players explore their options in the offseason, and every year Insight is tweeting that he's a free agent, and then every year he's ended up right back on Toronto. So I know this year was different and from a performance standpoint, and it feels like that it would be surprising somewhat to see I might have said Envoy there. It's getting late for me. I don't even know what I just said. I just had a massive brain fart, but what I meant to say was that if you know, Insight has been on Toronto for his entire career, and it's always felt like he's tweeting free agency, then he makes his return, and he's inevitably back. I don't want to say it would be surprising if he's back, because that we've seen it so much historically that if they tweeted that Toronto has signed Insight, I'd be like, well, I guess that is what it is. I think this past season was the final nail in the coffin for that partnership I think it's run its course. For my boy Toby, I hope if he is still sticking around on Toronto, I hope they go a different direction. But until they actually do, I'm not gonna, like, there's still a very slight sliver in the back of my mind that thinks, like, Insight could be wearing a Toronto jersey next year, and I wouldn't be super shocked.
Yeah, according to Breaking Point, Insight and Kleenex were the second longest tenured pair in CDL history, or I think even COD history, really, because this is including Scump and Formal, Scump and Crimsic. So they said the longest are Simp and Abizi is number one, then Insight and Kleenex, Scump and Formal, Scump and Crimsic, Dashy and Shotzi, Crimsic and Karma, and Aches and TP. So if you think about that, every other pair won a world championship, at least one world championship with each other. The only pair that didn't is Insight and Kleenex. Granted, they were relatively close. You know, they obviously famously got 5-0'd in the Champs Grand Finals. So, you know, it happens. But they got to the Champs Grand Finals. They were on very, very competitive teams for a number of years. And they won majors and everything, and, you know, they deserve their flowers. But I think it's interesting that, you know, Toronto stuck with those two guys in particular, and obviously they had Scrap for part of that as well. But, you know, they stuck with them. Like Simp and Abizi, they won 2 world championships. They were the most dominant team in Cold War. Like Scump and Formal, Scump and Crimsic, Crimsic and Karma. Like, those guys played, like, for, you know, like how many tournaments do you think in total those guys played together versus Toronto? Like, we know that Kremp won like 38 major tournaments or however they term it, but I would say like, close to 50 tournaments for just those guys playing together. And, they weren't even together as long as Insight and Kleenex were. So it is almost a 2,000 day old pairing, 1979. So nearly 2,000 consecutive days that they were on the team together. So, it is kind of an end of an era for Toronto, but it's a long time coming. I don't, again, it is not an indictment on Insight as a player, but like when it's your time, and some of these pairings just kind of fade out and some of them kind of explode, as we've seen with some of the pairings that are on that list. Like it was kind of messy at the end for some of those teams. But it was time for him to move on. I do think that there's a chance that he ends up on like a Carolina, for example, or, I think Carolina's probably the team. Maybe Vancouver, if they don't want to go with Skies, maybe you go with Insight. I don't know if one is better than the other necessarily, but I think that it was time for them to kind of split up, and I think it could be in the best interest of Kleenex for his future, because he's getting older. Who knows how many times he's going to get a chance at winning another, winning his first or world championship or another major. And I think that it was always going to kind of be a ceiling for him, is Insight on that team. So I hope for Toronto's sake that they can upgrade this offseason.
Yeah, and I will say too, I just was typing and lost my train of thought, but I will say that if Insight isn't in the CDL, I wouldn't be surprised if he absolutely fries in challengers. We've seen that so many times before, and it's like, he was so good when he first came into the CDL that it's just like it wouldn't be surprising to me if he did go down to challengers and just absolutely fried after going there. Like even someone like Cammy, like Cammy's done pretty well for himself in challengers, and Cammy obviously had the MVP Cold War season, but I would say that you could probably argue Insight at his peak was, I don't know if I could say. I think they were pretty comparable in terms of how strong both of them were and whatever their best seasons were. There were a lot of seasons, though, where Insight just had really strong KD numbers, and everyone was like, he just doesn't have a ton of interaction and stuff. So that would be interesting to go back and look at. But regardless, I do think it'll be interesting to see what happens at Insight. I again, not holding my breath, and I wouldn't be shocked if he does end up back on Toronto. I think it is more likely, though, that after this past season, most of the CDL teams might not take a chance on him, and he could be back in challengers. But I do think you brought up a good point at the end there. Maybe a team like Carolina or bottom of the pack. I mean, who knows what Cloud9 does, but maybe Cloud9 gives him a shot and tries to do something with him. That wouldn't surprise me either.
Yeah, and again, like Boston, we'll talk about them in like literally just a minute, but like I think they're kind of they could be in a similar situation as the Boston Breach were when they came in. There was a late entrance and they needed to make a roster, and they ended up with a team that just did not seem like it was kind of all jumbled together, and you're like, I don't know if these guys are going to work. They ended up making champs the following year. So, maybe that is like, if that happens for Insight, then that's a success. Like, Toronto like limped into champs this season. So if they made a champs with Boston or Carolina or whoever, then, I think that is, that's a great opportunity for him. Enlightened said Koi could try for Lurks with Kleenex and Kips. I do think that's like Lurks is somebody that's going to be looked at, I think, quite intently by a lot of teams. And Toronto, they should have some money based on the Joe Deceives deal, so they should be able to do something with that. Ravens don't even pay buyouts. Trying to get a bag from another for a kid is pretty insane. Enlightens, maybe a BZ goes to Genomates with Joe Deceives. Yeah, I think that it could happen. I'm not a super big fan of it, but I think that it certainly seems like that is at least on the table, especially if Abizi's not back for LAT. Let's talk about the Boston Breach, though, because I think it was maybe 2 episodes ago now, we talked about M80 and the report that they could be buying the Boston Breach, or they could be entering the CDL. I don't think that the report actually indicated that it was for the Boston Breach, but we put it together that the M80 owner is from Boston. It would make a lot of sense if they were the Boston representative. And the Boston Breach actually put out a statement on August 20th and said the ownership and management of the Boston Breach are incredibly proud of the organization we have built together over the past several years. We could not be more grateful for the unwavering support and loyalty of the fan base that has grown alongside us. As we look ahead, we want to extend our deepest thanks to everyone who has stood by the team and the players we have been fortunate to count among our alumni during our time in the CDL. We would be nothing without our fans and supporters. You are the foundation of everything we do. While we cannot share further details at this moment, we plan to announce some exciting news next week regarding the future of the Boston Breach. We want you to know that the next chapter for Boston will be written in Boston. The future is bright, and we cannot wait to share what's coming. Thank you for being part of this journey. More soon. And that was from the Boston Breach management. So again, so next week is this coming week, if you're listening to this. So who knows exactly when that would be, but so we now know that something is going to happen. Something is going to be announced this coming week. And it says that the next chapter for Boston will be written in Boston. So that indicates that the team that, replaces the Breach in the CDL would also be Boston. So if it's Boston M80, that would make a lot of sense. What do you think about this? Because I saw a lot of people rightfully giving the Breach their flowers, as they're on their way out, it seems. And I think the writing has been on the wall to some extent for the last several years, because, I don't even know, this was probably 3 years ago that they laid off everybody, and it seemed like they were almost going to fold at that moment. They stuck around for several years. But the flowers have been given over the past few days. So, before we know exactly what actually is going to come of this, what are your just overall thoughts about Boston? I know we talked about a little bit about this. So, what do you think just in general as we kind of move forward into this next chapter of the Boston CDL experiment?
Yeah, I mean, feels like we're setting the stage for an in memoriam for the Boston Breach, and don't gotta do it right now. Maybe that's the next episode, depending on whatever this upcoming announcement is. But it does seem like the Boston Breach's time in the CDL is coming to an end, and I have stated multiple times now that, regardless of those layoffs and behind the scenes issues and performance in recent years, outside of all that, I have always given my flowers to the organization for what they did for the community. As you set the stage with entering the scene late, putting together a competitive roster immediately in that first season. Obviously things didn't work out great in every season after that, but even beyond the roster construction, the performance and all that, their willingness to host events plural, not even just one event. I am pretty sure they have, since Boston entered the organization, they've hosted more events than Atlanta FaZe technically, or FaZe, because FaZe only hosted this one the past year. So that's just a crazy thing to think about in that sense, and the organization is potentially leaving after that. So I do think if M80, whoever is replacing them, they do have it. I'm not going to say they have huge shoes to fill. It's not Shaq sized shoes, but maybe it's some size 14s or something, a little it's not super small shoes, but it's not size 20s or whatever. It's something a little above average, and they gotta come in and take care of business. They will. If this is what everyone is anticipating, they seemingly are entering the off season at a time where it's not like Boston Breach first entering the scene and having to scramble to put together a roster. They might not have their pick of the litter in terms of being able to pick anybody, but they'll definitely have more options available to them than what Boston Breach had at the time of that first roster. But again, my bigger thing is from that organizational standpoint, is this an org we can trust? Or is this one of those other organizations that's just going to come in, try to get a buyout and do wrong by players, and it's just another team that we're asking for in a couple of years to be replaced by somebody else? I hope that's not the case. So we'll have to wait and see what the news is, but I'm sure that'll be something we are talking about a lot on our next episode whenever we're live, assuming the news drops before that.
I think that M80, if this is the organization that ends up replacing the Breach, I think they have the reputation of throwing some money around to try to force their way to the top, which is, we love that. Like we're all in on that. Like the Falcons, it didn't work out necessarily for most of the season, but neither one of us were like, maybe you guys shouldn't spend that much money on Sally. And we're like, I don't care. Like you can give them $10 million for all I care. Like that's the kind of stuff that I want to see from teams. And that's why it's been so exciting that not only have we had Falcons kind of enter the fray and be like another big spending team, but the Gentlemates, like, if you think about it, we had the Gentlemates replace LAG. LAG were dead in the water, essentially. They were in a very similar situation to the Breach, that they laid off all their people. It was like writing on the wall. We knew that they were going to go, leave the CDL at some point in the near future, and they weren't spending really anything like immediately after the Arcides and Spark contracts. Like that was pretty much the end of it, and they basically just ended it right there. The Vegas Legion were the exact same, even though they were actually worse than LAG was, because they never really tried from the very beginning. But then we got the Falcons from that, and we got the Gentlemates from LAG. And if, again, Boston is, I don't even want to put the Breach with LAG in the Legion. I'm not saying, but I'm just talking about from a standpoint of like the Boston Breach could not actually compete with the top teams for pretty much the entirety of the CDL, in terms of contracts and all. And if M80 can be one of those teams that's like, we could go and get a top guy, or, if we could go get Kremp, for example, we could buy him out, or we could go get Kleenex or Kips or whoever, and we're able to spend money, then that's an incredible upgrade for the league. The only thing is that Boston, what they couldn't do in terms of the contracts, were doing all of that in like content and certainly the tournaments. Like they hosted a bunch of majors, they had challengers tournaments. I think that they were one of the only teams, maybe the only team, that they hosted a challengers open with every major that they hosted, which is like obviously incredible for the challengers scene. And it really shows like a commitment to Call of Duty in general and not just the CDL. They were also one of the only teams, and I think they were the most recent team to have an actual academy team, and they were committed to that for a long, long time. And it's been like the last 2 seasons that they've kind of got away with from that. But maybe that's a Doug Spencer Martin thing. Like maybe once he's kind of out of the fray, they were like, all right, we don't need to do the academy thing. But again, I really appreciate what Boston did and tried, and fair play to them. They got third at champs. Not a lot of organizations got to say that, or will get to say that by the time they exit the CDL. So they deserve their flowers, and I hope the best for them. And I hope that M80 is an upgrade, and that is literally just to say, I hope that they're even better than what we got from Boston, which was a pleasant surprise, I should say, about like, what they could do in the CDL. Enlighten said, I have to scroll up a little bit. If LA Thieves keep Scrap and HyDra, Abizi is up for grabs. Those kids rather play with Envoy than Abizi or Jody is kind of weird, in my opinion. I'm looking forward for Boston's new situation. Beans need a spot. Wonder if Beans could get on Gentlemates. I don't know what you're smoking. I would be. I mean, if Beans can get on Gentlemates, congratulations to Beans. But I would. Yeah. I think that would be like we have swung and missed quite a bit this offseason to end up with him.
I think that's what I said, was that I think it would be a later off-season move, but I mean, it wouldn't be the most crazy thing in a scenario like you said, where they just like don't get some of those top AR targets that we're reportedly hearing they're interested in.
Yeah, and Lighton said, yeah, probably not offer it, but Toronto should have dropped Insight instead of Beans after that merch show. He was the better AR all year, fell apart when he left. Yeah, I think it was over no matter what, though. I think as soon as they couldn't keep Mercules, and I don't blame them necessarily, because I don't think that they had the opportunity unless they had signed him to a contract before the tournament. I think that was probably their opening. If they had signed him to a deal through, like a 1+1 or whatever before the tournament, and then he has that performance, then you could be like, well, you're kind of stuck with us. Like, we're kind of married, at least for the next year and a half. But obviously that didn't happen, and they had to watch him go to Optic and win a world championship. So it's unfortunate, but yeah, I personally do not predict that Beans will end up on the Paris Gentlemates to begin the season. I think that would be, that'd be really weird, honestly. And we probably would be in for a really crazy off season if that's the case, because that means that Paris just has like nobody, like no top tier talent to pick up this offseason. So I don't know what will come of Alluka and Scrap HyDra Simp, like what happens there if they kind of have to. I think even like they bring back Ghosty and Estriel and then a fourth, like, I mean, maybe Beans would fit in there, but like that'd be really weird to think about. But we'll have to wait and see. Anything else before we get out of here?
Nope. I think I'll just say it because we kind of mentioned his name without directly saying. I think Nasty would be more likely to end up on Gentlemates in that scenario, especially, Nasty and Joe have played together, so I wouldn't hate that in that world. What did you just say before this? It was Joe, Ghosty, someone in Beans?
Estriel.
Oh, I like that. Joe, Estriel, Ghosty, and Nasty. Yeah. I think that's if that's the end result for Gentlemates at this current moment, it's a not great offseason for them. But if everything goes wrong before that and that's the end result after the fact, I think it's salvageable.
I think that Estriel is a great, like he's the best backup plan ever, because right now he's a restricted free agent, so they can hold on to him as long as they want. And I think what they're going to end up doing is like, let's see what happens with Scrap, HyDra, Simp, Alluka. Like these are like the top four. If we get none of these guys, then Joe and Estriel as our two SMGs this offseason, that's great. Like there's a reason that they signed them late in the season anyway. And if they could get Ghosty back, I think he's an unrestricted free agent, but depending on what happens with LAT, FaZe, and Falcons, I think he's probably open to returning. And then it's just about who's going to be flexing. I mean, pushing for Draza maybe if Alluka replaces him on FaZe, I think that could be interesting. And obviously, like I think that like a Draza, Ghosty, Joe, and Estriel team is really, really good and could compete for championships next season.
Like I said, though, like that's my general standpoint right now on this RosterMania is there's all these ifs and buts and what could happen, and if this thing happens, that sets off this other thing, all that. We're still gonna be waiting for a little bit, I feel like, but when that first move happens, it's gonna set everything off, and I can't wait.
And Lion says Beans was good with Jody. They were cool, and Big Ben won like 5 events this year in Challengers. Nasty Beans duo, been saying it 2 years straight. I think that it could be like Minnesota or, again, Boston. We literally don't know what their philosophy will be in terms of roster construction, so we're going to have to wait and see on that as well. And like you said, C9, we have no idea what they're going to do, because I would assume Wevy will be on the team. That's just like, that's a feeling. I don't necessarily know that to be true, but just the idea that you would go after him late in the season last year as like a rookie and, like to not have him on the starting roster to start the 2027 season, I just wouldn't get that. I don't know if they were impressed by Gwyn at EWC either. So like he is also a part of that. And I think I said with Gwyn and a lot of these players is like, they are like tier 3, tier 4 players in the terms of like the tier 1 is like, what I just said is like Scrap, HyDra, Alluka, like these players are like, that's who's going to dictate like what's going on this off season. And then you have like the Ghosties of the world. You even have like Nasty and who knows like what Kleenex and Kips, like if they're on the move, if Kremp is on the move, like those are the players that are like in tier 2. And then you keep going down the list and it's like Gwyn, Wevy, those are the players that are like, I have to wait to see what the top 6, 7, 8 teams do in the league to make sure that I get a spot at the end of the offseason. So I think, again, it's going to be really interesting. I love the offseason because of this. I think we're going to get eventually to a point where nobody's doing anything. Everybody's kind of waiting, and there'll be like 1 or 2 teams that we don't know for sure what's going on with them, because that happens literally every single year, and they'll announce it like the week of the first matches, but
after the game's already out.
So again, it's going to be interesting, and we'll be breaking it all down throughout the rest of the off season as it goes. Thank you, everybody who's been listening and watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, or follow the podcast feed, wherever platform you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, as well as YouTube. Bink did a beta code giveaway, and I think we added like 6 or 7 subscribers to our YouTube channel. We're at 350, at least before the episode, we were at 359 subscribers on our YouTube channel. So if you are listening to this or you're watching this, on YouTube and potentially you're not subscribed to this, it happens to me all the time. If you could just take 1 second and subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, however you're comfortable doing so, we would really appreciate it. Obviously, the growth of our channel has been really great this season. I feel like we hit 300 subscribers like a few months ago, and we're already like at almost nearly 360 subscribers. So that has been incredible for us, and we appreciate the support that you guys give. But again, if you want to subscribe on YouTube, or we're also on all the podcast platforms, we're also on Twitch. So if you want to watch the live version of the podcast or the VOD, you could watch it on YouTube or twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. As we said earlier, Hype in the Twitch chat, he gifted 5 subs, which is awesome, and I really appreciate him doing that. You can subscribe at twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast, or you can follow or subscribe at twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. You can follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast is at Ego Chall Podcast. And not sure exactly when the next show will be. Next week starts college football, which is probably the best time of the year for me personally. And then the NFL starts like a week or two later, I think like a week and a half later. And again, I think we said it on the last episode, but like that will probably spell the end of our Sunday shows for at least a little bit during the off season. So we might be going to midweek, but we'll let you know. And the best way to keep up with us anyway about like when the podcast is coming out, when we're doing a live show, is to follow or to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching on. So again, really appreciate the love and support. My voice is like actually hurting because it's been a long show and I've been talking a lot, but appreciate everybody. And Bink, take it away.
Yeah, I thought this was going to be one of our shorter episodes, but whenever I think that's the ones we always yap enough about. So I thought this was a fun one, though, and we had definitely a lot of good stuff to talk about. So appreciate everyone stopping by. Like Preston said, anybody in the YouTube chat who's not already subscribed, if you want to just take a couple seconds and press that sub button, we really would appreciate it. Shout out Hugh Lights in the YouTube chat for interacting a bunch, and shout out New Dark Age Now for being in there earlier. And obviously, like Preston said, shout out the boy Joshua Hype Riley for gifting some subs earlier in the Twitch channel. But yeah, I mean, I had fun tonight. Hope everybody listening had a good time as well. Seems like we at least have a little idea of what we might be talking about next week in terms of Boston, but there could also be some more RosterMania reports and whatnot as well too. I hope there are, so there's even more for us to discuss. But we'll be back at some point to break it all down for you guys, and hope to see you then. So thank you guys as always for all the support. Really do appreciate it. And remember to send the chow.